believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, of course, Ricardo Vrendas, also known as Ricky Vrendas, and a great episode for you today. Today we have Olivia, Mikos, and Joshua Coleman from V is for Vaccine. And Joshua and Olivia have been in the health freedom community for a long time, and we go into their own personal stories, what the organization's all about, and much more. But before we get into all that, of course, I have to remind you, this is a value for value show. If you get some value out of these conversations, please consider giving some value back. It doesn't have to be financial. I know a lot of people are in tough financial times. So please share, review, subscribe to the show on all the platforms I'm on. And I'm on many video platforms and all the audio platforms. I'm on Spotify, iTunes, all the other podcast apps. You can find the Ripple Effect Podcast on there. And also I'm on BitChute, Odyssey, Band.video, Rumble, and Rockfin. And by watching the show on Rockfin, you do contribute to the Ripple Effect Podcast. So check out their app, listen to the content there, or watch it there if you want to watch the video version of these episodes. And shout out to Josh. Thanks for adding some images to the video version of this episode. So please check out the video on all those platforms I mentioned. And I'm on a bunch more. Just go in the show description or the website, rippleeffectpodcast.com, to find all the channels. So if you can support the show, here's some ways financially to support the show. We have a Venmo account. We have a crypto wallet if you want to send Bitcoin or Ethereum. We have a PayPal account if you want to send a one-time donation. We have a Patreon page if you want to support us monthly. And that's really one of the best ways of supporting the show because I can consistently count on that every month. And once a month, or at least I try to do it at least once a month, I do a Patreon podcast with my Patreon supporters. So it's a great way of connecting with myself, other listeners, also a great way of getting on a episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast. And like I always tell you guys, there's a lot of really smart, intelligent listeners of the show. You guys are constantly reaching out, sending me articles and stuff that you're researching. So donate as little as $1 a month, and you'll have the opportunity of joining us on the next Patreon podcast. And if a small percentage of the people who listen, download, and watch the Ripple Effect Podcast donated as little as $1 a month, I would be able to do the show full time. So please remember, no amount is too little. Another way you can support the show is checking out our merch store, and we have tons of stuff on there: hoodies, t-shirts, tank tops, kids' clothes, and much more. I just ordered some more merch recently, some hoodies for my kids, and actually got myself another new hoodie, and the quality is amazing. And I did my best to make sure nothing is overpriced and everything is affordable. So you'll be able to find some cheaper stuff. You'll be able to find stuff that's a little bit higher quality. Whatever your price range is, you'll be able to find something you can afford. Of course, if you like the music you hear in the intro of this podcast, please check out Theory 6. It's my solo music project. You can find it anywhere you can stream or download music. You can find a link to the music on my website, rippleeffectpodcast.com or rickyvrendas.com. A few other ways of supporting the show is checking out my sponsors. The first one is probably one of the most important ones. It's Content Safe. And Matt from Content Safe has been on the Ripple Effect Podcast before. He's also been on my other show, The Union of the Unwanted, and he built my website. He also is responsible for getting the video version of the Ripple Effect Podcast on all the video platforms I'm on. I upload to one channel, and he sends that video to all my other channels. So if you're a streamer, podcaster, he's a great person to know, great person to hook up with and help you save some time from uploading. Check out Matt from Content Safe, and also let him know you're a listener of the Ripple Effect Podcast, and he will definitely hook you up. You should also check out the Autonomy course at the University of Reason, created by Richard Grove, who's also a past guest of the Ripple Effect Podcast and the Union of the Unwanted. He's also the host of Grand Theft World. If you're looking to learn some new skills, if you're looking to connect with a freedom-minded community, please check out Richard Grove's The University of Reason. By signing up, you can help yourself and help the Ripple Effect Podcast at the same time. And my last sponsor is Element Electrolytes, created by Rob Wolf, who is a past guest of the Ripple Effect podcast, and also someone who's been on every big show you could think of that talks about health and nutrition. He's somebody who's been around the health and nutrition community for a long time, really knows this stuff, and he created Element Electrolyte Mix, which is electrolytes you add to your water. They taste amazing. They can help with muscle fatigue, headaches, and so many other symptoms that are because of dehydration. And if you live somewhere where it's cold, or if you just struggle to drink water all day, or you're fasting or doing keto and you're having a hard time staying hydrated and you're looking for some healthy method to staying hydrated that tastes good, won't kick you out of fasting, won't kick you out of ketosis, check out Element Electrolytes. And if you use the link, you'll get a free gift with every purchase. And if you use the link just once for the next, I think, 6 to 12 months, every time you purchase Element Electrolytes, you'll be contributing to the Ripple Effect podcast. So please check out Element Electrolytes. They also have chocolate flavors, which you can add to coffee so you can stay hydrated while you're drinking your coffee. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Element Electrolytes, check out Rob Wolf's past appearance on the Ripple Effect podcast, episode 381. And if you guys are looking for an easy way to find past episodes like 381 with Rob Wolf, check out my website, and on the desktop version of my website, top right-hand corner, you'll find a search bar where you can put in a name of a guest or a number of an episode or maybe even a topic, and you'll be able to find past episodes of the Ripple Effect podcast on my website. So please check that out. And also on my website are links to all the things I reference and all the ways of supporting the show. You can also find all my shows on there. You can find my other show, The Union of the Unwanted, which I host with Sam Tripoli, Charlie Robinson, and Midnight Mike from the OBDM show. So please check out all that and much more on the rippleeffectpodcast.com. Thanks, guys. Enjoy this amazing conversation. And I have tons of amazing guests lined up, already booked for the next couple weeks and for the next month. So please keep a lookout for new episodes, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Alternative medicine was embraced because my mom had experienced severe problems with pharmaceuticals. She had been in a water skiing accident and then was put on Feldine, which basically destroyed her health. And from that, she had health problems for years and years and years afterwards. And it's like that was kind of the starting point. So knowing that, and then having my own health issues where Western medicine didn't help me, and then I ended up finding my own remedies. I just came to trust in alternative remedies and natural remedies versus Western medicine. And so with that, I think you just getting into that field, you just kind of start learning about negative effects of other pharmaceuticals and people's experiences. And I actually had a friend who in 96, her child was ended up being diagnosed with autism after the MMR vaccine. And this was pre Andrew Wakefield, which I think that was in 98 when that whole debacle came out. So I had my own experience personally. I had my own experience with friends knowing that, you know, these things aren't perfect. And then as time went on, I got into holistic health, to be a holistic health practitioner, massage therapy, all these things. And just through that, and even just having clients, again, share more experiences, I ended up meeting more people who had children who were injured from vaccines. And so it's just kind of personal experience, meeting other people, having that reinforced that Western medicine, while we need it and it's beneficial in many ways, there's also negative consequences to some of the things that they provide. And so when I ended up having my own children, I had gotten enough information to be extremely wary of vaccinating. So we ended up not vaccinating our kids, and thank God. And so with that, though, we ended up homeschooling our children. And then in 2015, when Senate Bill 277 came about in California, that not only threatened children attending school, but initially it was threatening homeschoolers as well. So I'd actually been pretty vocal about vaccines prior to that. I was one of the few random people who you see online arguing with people about vaccines and being outspoken. And so when SB 277 came about, it's like everybody kind of came out of the woodwork who, had either been speaking up, had their own experience, and we kind of all found each other. And then the activism kind of ensued from there. But yeah, it's kind of a boring story, but that's my background as far as kind of not being, too comfortable with the vaccine program, pharmaceuticals, all that stuff. And then just kind of gradually turning into an activist because of it.
I think it's a common story, right? Like something in life during your journey, you end up like putting together, because that's kind of what I have a somewhat similar story. Like I was always skeptical of like big pharma and the nutrition information that we're given, and I would always run into these alternative doctors, and I'm like, why is this treatment being demonized? It seems to work. It seems, early. I was big into like Dr. Brzezinski. He was one of my first guests on my show in 2013 or 14, and my show was just growing. It was very small, and I remember watching his documentary, and I had Eric Marola on too, the filmmaker, and they were in the documentary. They were talking about like just the amount of money and resources that went to demonizing his work. And I'm like, they talking about all these fake accounts that would attack people and all this stuff, and just say that it was pseudoscience and he's a murderer and all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. And then I remember this is the beginning of my podcast. Had very little following whatsoever, and I just was excited about having a big guest like him and somebody that I was a fan of. And I think I tweeted it or put it on my Facebook page. I put it somewhere on social media, and immediately people started, like, just random accounts I've never heard of were just like jumping on, attacking me and saying that, I shouldn't have him on. He's a murderer. And I'm like, oh my God, this really does exist. And if they're, keeping up with like every interview he does, even on smaller shows like mine at the time, I'm like, it was kind of a rude awakening to like how serious this really was, and how deep it really went. And so I loved hearing stories about these doctors that had just that have been attacked, and each doctor was like just one more puzzle piece to the full picture. It's like, oh, okay, like there's something going on here. And you start like, why is he being demonized? Why is chemo and radiation completely okay, even though we know that kills people? And his treatment, there's no evidence that it does, but yet it can't get FDA approved, and he's being sued. And so I think a lot of stories are like that. Even RFK Jr.'s story, right? Because he was a big chemical attorney, and then it was mothers who kept telling him like, hey, you got to look into this, and I think eventually like some mother went to his house and like left a bunch of information on his porch or something like that, and that's when he like woke up to it. But I'd like to, and I this is why I started a podcast, because I don't know when to stop talking, but I want to get into also your perspective on why specifically vaccines, because I'm sure you guys have experienced similar situations where it seems like I can get people on board with like big pharma bad, but vaccines have always been the exception to the rule, right? For some reason, it's like you could talk about, oh yeah, Pfizer's getting fined for this, or this, cholesterol prescription drug killing people, or whatever it may be. Everybody is okay with that, but like vaccine seems to be like the one issue where there's like some detachment to reality. And I have my own theory on that. But before I get carried away, let's get Josh's background and a little bit of his story.
I wasn't really interested in any of this kind of thing growing up, and I had really no knowledge about vaccinating and vaccinations. I had heard Jenny McCarthy and Jim Carrey and JB Handley talking about it on Larry King, and I remember thinking that was fascinating and believing what they were saying. But that was years before I had children. So when I had kids, I thought, I need to look into this. I'm not sure whether I should do this or not. And I started doing Google searches. I didn't know how to research, and I probably didn't go through more than a page or two of Google searches, and sort of mostly saw positive things. I didn't really see anything negative, of course. I had no idea that was so controlled. And I kind of felt overwhelmed pretty quickly. You know, there were so many different vaccines for so many different diseases, and I thought, okay, I'm over my head. I'm just gonna let's just trust the doctor. You know, we'll listen to our doctor. He's the professional. He knows better than we do, and so we sort of went with his recommendations for our child, and which was just everything on the schedule, which is I think what they do with every kid. And my son Otto woke up after his 17-month round of vaccines, unable to walk, completely unable to walk, almost not even able to crawl. And that was shocking to us. We took him straight to the ER, and over the next couple of days, they did an MRI, and it turned out that he had something that's called transverse myelitis. I remember having to keep asking the doctor, how do you pronounce that? How do you pronounce it? I know how to pronounce it now. Oh, man. So they said, has he recently been vaccinated? And I said, yes. And they said, well, it could be that, you know, it's a 1 in a million type of a thing. And so to explain to people what transverse myelitis is, what kind of an injury that is, it's like vaccinating. The idea of vaccinating is you're trying to train the body through allergic reaction to respond to diseases and fight diseases. And so what a vaccine does is they inject some of the disease and an adjuvant in, and the adjuvant is something that irritates the system, something obvious like aluminum, for say. Your body knows aluminum's bad, and your immune system starts to attack it. Well, right next to it, you might have some polio. And so the idea is that you're training the immune system to also attack the polio. My son had received 4 shots all at once for, I think, something like 9 total vaccines in those 4 injections. So it's trying to train his body, his immune system, to react to a lot of different diseases all at once, and which is not abnormal. And my son's immune system got confused and started attacking the myelin sheath around his spinal cord, thinking it was something bad. And so it basically gave him a spinal cord injury, a permanent injury. So now he is paralyzed from the waist down. And of course, this is something was never mentioned to me as a potential thing that could happen when I was saying vaccinate him for this and vaccinate him for that. So, you know, I was pretty annoyed that I had not received informed consent. But it was like the 1 in a million thing. So I thought, okay, well, you know, we're the unlucky family. You know, my son's the unlucky one that this happened to, so the rest of us could live and have these life-saving vaccinations. But I did think it was interesting. One of the things that happened with my son, you know, just a few weeks later, one of the treatments he had was something called plasmapheresis, which is very similar to a blood transfusion. And before they would do this treatment, I had to sign like a 2-page document, and they made sure I read every single word. And it basically kind of said something to the effect of that he could end up with an STD from this plasmapheresis. It's rare, but it could happen, just so you know, and you sign off on it, so that I had informed consent. And I remember thinking at the time, I didn't get this when I vaccinated him. I didn't get this much information then. So I just was sort of clueless still. I thought, okay, 1 in a million, 1 in a million. And I was just really focused on treating my son's injury, you know, because with transverse myelitis, the first 2 years after the injury, there's a 1/3 chance of that they can fully heal, 1/3 chance not heal at all, and a 1/3 chance of possible healing. So, you know, went to Johns Hopkins on the East Coast in Baltimore. I live in California, and did all kinds of treatments there. And when we were there, the doctors sort of started to test him to see what had caused the transverse myelitis, because there's a handful of things, and not for the reason he wanted to find out whether it was a vaccine injury or not, but because some things that cause transverse myelitis can be reoccurring. And so if it was one of those things, he wanted to take preventative measures to prevent that from happening. And through sort of like a process of elimination, they did narrow it down to vaccination. And so that was sort of it for me for a while. I didn't become some kind of activist. So I thought, okay, we're the 1 in a million. But I did stop vaccinating my son. And, you know, around 2014, I really started to see this big ramping of hatred towards anybody not vaccinating. Like, there's no reason not to vaccinate. There's no reason to skip. There's no reason to delay. And so I was starting to have discussions with people, and I was reading articles and watching news shows. And of course, the Disneyland outbreak of measles had happened at the time. And so now I have this interest, of course, in vaccines because of what's happened to my son. So I'm watching these programs and reading these articles. And I really don't have like a great education on vaccines, but I know a little bit. And I am reading things in these articles that are false. And that I thought that was interesting. I remember the LA Times saying something about like, oh, vaccines, conspiracy theorists think vaccines cause neurological disorders, and they don't, and other things. And I thought, okay, it's in the insert. These things are definitively caused, and it's admitted. Why are they lying? And then I started researching and having these conversations with people online, arguing with people online, getting backed into corners with arguments, and digging my way out through doing research. And I really found out quite a lot. And unfortunately, I was shocked to find out that the vaccine program really is not, the level of safety and standards is much lower than all other medicines across the globe. I did not expect to find that out. I wasn't looking to find that out. But that is indeed what I found out. It was shocking to find out that the vaccine manufacturers were exempt from liability, that started, passed in 86 and enacted in 87, that they're not double-blind inert placebo safety testing the vaccines, which, that kind of safety testing gives you no accurate data, which means we don't know what's 1 in a million. And really, I had heard about a documentary film called Trace Amounts that was really talking about, kind of focused on mercury in vaccines, thimerosal in vaccines, which, by the way, is not completely out. It's still there in Trace Amounts, hence the title Trace Amounts. And at that screening that I went to, there was a Q&A afterwards. The film was phenomenal. And there was a Q&A afterwards, and people were asking questions, and I had asked some questions of the filmmakers. And it seemed like everybody around me that was asking questions were a 1 in a million vaccine injury and another 1 in a million vaccine injury. And I'm like, holy crap, like I've never been in a room with so many lottery winners. This is insane. And really that sort of kind of opened me up to realizing that there's a lot of problems going on here. And then I was sort of met all these different activists who'd been involved in this fight that I didn't know even existed, a fight to maintain the right to choose. And so really that kind of began my thing where I kind of said, I wish I had had more information before I made this decision, and I didn't have informed consent, and I want to help other people have, a proper education and have informed consent going forward. And that kind of kicked everything off.
And the thing is, too, is a lot of people who are in this battle, they do have personal stories like yours. And, I've had Dr. Brian Hooker on. That's what, for people who don't know, I'm sure people have listened to the episode, but he was linked to the CDC whistleblower story, which was a part of basically what the Vax documentary was. A lot of people called an anti-Vax documentary. It's like, well, you obviously didn't see it because it's not about just being anti-vax. It's about this one specific story, this whistleblower, and the evidence that shows that there's something there. And he had a personal story. I don't know if you know Brian Fessa from We the Patriots USA, originally from CT Freedom Alliance, which was a organization out of Connecticut that was fighting back against removal of exemptions and all that type of stuff. He has a vaccine-injured child. I mean, you can go on and on and on, where just like a lot of these people who get thrown into this, they have personal stories that ends up, making them rethink what they thought they knew. And what you're saying is so important, and because the 1986 Act, and I think Dr. Wakefield's documentary is really, really good because it's entertaining, and it's also shows you how it shows you how, like, once you become a parent, there's a lot of things that you never question that you might start questioning. And in that documentary, for people who haven't watched, and I believe you can find it on Rumble or BitChute or one of the alternative video platforms, and it's a couple having their first child, and all of a sudden one of them starts doing a little bit of research, and they run into this, and they start asking questions. And so many people, that becomes their journey, where they start questioning things because they're not concerned about it when they're injecting something in yourself, but you never become more worried than when you have kids and you start, like I said, questioning everything. And so many of the people in this realm of this, health freedom world are just pissed off parents, and even you saw in the GMO movement too, like it was a lot of parents, a lot of moms, a lot of dads who just wanted chemicals out of their food, and so I think that's why we're so passionate. So many people, and my kids, same thing, have never been vaccinated. I try to be outspoken about it, not because it's a great a party conversation, but because I want other parents to know that, like, hey, your pediatrician's lying to you. Like, your kid's not going to die of some horrible disease that could have been prevented if you don't vaccinate them. And my kids are healthy and athletic and cognitively, always, of course I want to say above average, but at least average, and so to me, like, we need people to be outspoken. But for so long, this was a taboo topic where, I mean, it was like talking about 9/11 right after 9/11. Like, it just always turned into a heated, argument. No, people would just have such a emotional response, and 2 seconds into the conversation, you're like, wow, you really haven't looked into this at all. It's like you just keep repeating the narrative of it's safe and effective, it's safe and effective, it's safe and effective, and it's like you're just assuming somebody has looked at the science and somebody's done the research, and then when you do it yourself, you realize, like, wow, like there's a lot of gray areas and a lot of lies and deception. But so how does your personal stories lead to Vias for vaccines?
After I sort of meet these activists, I get involved and start helping fight legislation. I'm giving speeches talking about my personal story to let them know, like, vaccines are potentially harmful. Therefore, we should have choice. And I'm a videographer and editor, so I can create videos. And at that time, back in early 2015, there really wasn't a lot of great video content. And that's a really great way to educate people. Not everybody wants to sit and read, but you have something short and just kind of breaking something down and showing imagery, and it's interesting. And so I started creating video content, and I became the Vaxxed team had become aware of me when Vaxxed from Cover Up to Catastrophe came out. So I was brought onto that tour. Now, I was brought onto the tour sort of to record the Q&As that were happening as they were on tour, going theater to theater. But as they were going theater to theater, a lot of the people showing up, once again, were people who had these experiences. And Dell used to say, during the beginning of the Q&A, like, stand up if you've had an experience. And oftentimes it was half to 2/3 of the audience would stand up, because they had a child that had been injured, or they had been injured by a vaccine. And so Paulie Tommy, one of the producers of the film that was also on the tour, really saw the value in these, in all these parents that had these stories, because they would sort of come up to her and say, this is what happened to me, this is what happened to my child. And so she said, she kind of called me before I joined the tour and said, whatever on the Q&A is fine, but she's like, I want to get these stories. Let's interview these people. And so that's what we did. We started interviewing all these people that would come and see the film, that would be willing to sit or, and talk to us. And so the tour kind of became about that at a certain point, where we were shooting anywhere from 5 to 40 interviews, sometimes short, sometimes long, and people talking about their experience. And of course, a full range of people, from teachers and lawyers to politicians, stay-at-home moms, a huge range of people, and telling all kinds of stories, all different kind of injuries from different vaccines. So we create all this content, and it's getting a lot of attention. And we're putting these things out, and they're making waves on social media, getting tons of views. And then the shadow banning, and then the censorship comes. So that's kind of started in late 2016, and then early 2017. They really just killed us. As you know, the shadow banning, where places like Facebook and YouTube, they don't really they kind of limit the distribution of the video content. And so all of a sudden, our views that were going up started going down. And I know when we had good content, and when we had content that wasn't so great, and we were putting out great content, and it was just, people just were not seeing it. So that was really aggravating to me. And it was like, well, what do we do now? I'm trying to let people know that vaccines aren't just safe and effective. There's a whole nother side to the story, and they're effectively silencing us. The only ones seeing this now are the people that already know. We're not getting to the outside now with this video content. So that's where V is for Vaccine sort of kind of came out of that. Like, what do we do? And I had experimented a little bit with some signs, like on my own. Like I followed Senator Pan in Washington, D.C. With a sign that had his face on it, says liar plastered across it. And I got so much attention there. There was, hundreds of thousands of people there. And this big old sign, I just realized everybody's looking at it. What else can we do with a sign? So then I went to Comic-Con and held a sign that said, vaccines cause autism. And nobody could walk by without like looking at the sign. It's mesmerizing. And so I'd done it a couple more times. And now Olivia's helping me and assisting me with this. It was sort of like she was one of my editors when I was on the Vax tour. So I would be creating all this content. I was editing some stuff, but I couldn't even keep up with it. So Olivia was one of the editors. And so now she's helping me with the V is for Vaccine campaign. And we kind of, we sort of said, like, let's create this as a template. And so the first thing we did is we went to Disneyland and we dressed up like Star Wars characters. And we had Star Wars themed signs about vaccine risk. And we went there on one of the busiest weekends, which was the opening of Galaxy's Edge. And it was supposed to be record numbers of people. They were talking about 150,000 people coming in. And so we just covered the entrances, stood there with our signs, and we had flyers and information to give to people. And, we had photos and video shot at this event and put it out. And sort of like the health freedom community, the people that really cared about this, saw it and said, wow, this is great. Like, how do we do this? And so we started working towards creating, again, like I said, a template, signs that people could download and create themselves, and the flyers that they could get, and explaining how to do this. And of course, really, they don't need to always theme it. I mean, we do sort of like more of a just generic black, white, and red signs, and tell people, don't just go to the Capitol, because that's kind of like where everybody goes. They just go to the Capitol and they stand there with signs and they protest, and very few people see them there. I would see like 150, 200 people at the Capitol protesting, and they might be seen by 1,000 people. And I thought, man, just go to where the people are. If there's a concert happening, if there's Disneyland, if you have, any place at Costco where there's a ton of people going in and out, taking advantage of that. And yeah, people had very quickly sort of signed on to start doing it. And really, like, in no time, the campaign was being used in all 50 states and even 4 other countries across the globe. And also, 1986, the act, that was something that I worked on with Andy. I was a producer and cinematographer on that, as well as Vax 2, which was sort of, Vaxxed 2 was taking the content that we shot on the tour of all these vaccine injury interviews. But again, even those 2 movies, they're very hard to get out and get distributed. So, it's a lot of word of mouth to get these things out. So hitting the streets and being seen by the public is just exhilarating, and they can't censor you.
I was just wanted to interject there with the concept. I think which is important is, aside from the censorship and then trying to bypass the censorship, even one of the challenges in that is being able to impart information to people and have them be receptive to it. So when we kind of formulated this whole thing, Josh had been doing the signs and everything, but I think one of the, to me, which is why this has been successful, is because the information that we put on these signs and the flyers we handed out was basic and factual. And in my experience previously with interacting with people online or wherever, getting into anything emotional, it would just completely derail the whole exchange and trying to impart information, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help other people, not trying to get into arguments with people. I'm right, you're wrong. And so in my experience with that, I'd done so much research on vaccines that I noticed when I kept everything fact-based and there was nothing that could be refuted, it usually ended up being a good conversation, and people didn't weren't able to come back with anything that was, negative or confrontational or whatnot. So that was kind of the idea when we did these signs, is that we were going to keep it very basic and factual and not enter into anything that was emotional or couldn't be proven. And so I think that's been part of the success in the campaign, not just getting out there and being exposed to a bunch of people and getting around it, but also the way we've done it with the messaging.
Yeah, I mean, I think before, it seemed like all the messaging that we had seen before was all sort of, where there is risk, there must be choice, and vaccines can cause autism. And the vaccines and autism whole discussion is really toxic, because I think it's been such a threat to the vaccine program that the news has been on top of this all the way to the point where the average person, if you bring those things up, it sounds like you're saying the earth is flat. They literally shut down when you bring that up. And so we kind of said, like, why are we doing this the hard way? There's a lot of things that we can talk about that are not denied, about the manufacturers being exempt from liability, about the safety testing, about the increase of the schedule. That, like, when I was a kid, the vaccine schedule was 24 vaccines. Now it's 69. It's basically tripled. And so, yeah, it was like, let's just stick to factual information, things that are really not denied by the other side, and shock people into understanding that there's a lot more to learn here.
It reminds me, vaccines can cause autism reminds me of the term conspiracy theory. It's almost like you can't use it anymore because it's, you get pigeonholed. And it's the same thing with like bringing up autism and vaccines. It just completely derailed the conversation. And I love your approach, this idea of like, okay, well, if this gets an emotional reaction, let's just focus on some facts, maybe some things they're not familiar with. I mean, anytime you bring up the vaccine court, for example, most people they don't know anything about it. They give you that look like, really? What are you talking about? And so you go at it from that approach, it does work better. And I think during a interview I saw with you, Josh, you were talking about, and this was a really good point, about how if you do a really good interview at a rally or a protest or whatever with some local news, they can snip it, they can, maybe not air it at all, but you get these signs everywhere, and while they're getting, filming something else, or while they're taking pictures or whatever, you might get this little sign that has a really good point on it all over the place. So it's a really great way of kind of bypassing and being like, you know what, one way or another, we're going to get this message across.
No, I was just going to say, the media had used the whole autism thing. It was anti-vaxxers, autism. Like, that was the only thing that we had an issue with. And so in doing this, it's like it's opening up a whole other, window to what this is all about and what we're, advocating for, and that it's not just this one little, side effect and about Andy Wakefield. And, I mean, even I think into 2015 with SB 277, the narrative, when they cover anything about that, they'd still go back to just autism and Andy Wakefield and whatnot. So in doing this, I feel like it's opened things up a lot for people to see that, oh, it's not just this one little conspiracy theory. And
also paying attention to what the news is always leaving out. When you say something to an interviewer and they make sure to cut that out, we kind of said, oh, so these are the things they don't want being talked about. These are the things that make the vaccine program sound bad. So maybe those are the things we need to put on signs. The beautiful thing is, we have these very amazing, articulate speakers, people like Del Bigtree and Bobby Kennedy, and they go out and they do big interviews. But none of the real juicy, great stuff they say is ever going to make it to air. And they make the most wonderful points in the world. And of course, they're going to pick the little thing that they can kind of take out of context, and that, really kind of, doesn't really make a wonderful point. But we can have a 70-year-old mom out standing behind an interview with a sign, with a bullet point, with a fact that they would never speak about on the news. And it makes it on the news, and people see it and people read it and they digest that information. And that was the beautiful thing. I mean, really, for the first time, a lot of these things, a lot of this information was finally making it into national news, even international news, where I had never seen some of these bullet points make it before. And yeah, it's just, to be able to empower any person like that with a giant sign with some ink on it is incredible.
I'd like to get also everyone's opinion on how the COVID lockdowns and everything that happened the last couple of years, how that has changed many people's minds in vaccines. I just heard Brett Weinstein on the a recent Rogan podcast he was just on recently, and a little part in that interview in that podcast I found really interesting and really excited about was the fact that they were talking about the flu vaccine, and then he said, Brett said, because of what's happened the last couple of years, he's rethinking all the science with all the vaccines, and he, and I'm like, exactly. I'm like, this is not a new issue. This isn't a new thing. This is exactly what's been going on with the vaccine conversation the whole time. It's people think we've been brainwashed to believe that anything that's a vaccine is safe and effective, and there's no debate. And if you're debating it, you're a conspiracy theorist. And all the parents who have injuries are all insane and didn't know that their kid already had this injury and that type of thing. And I remember Dell saying this once, which was so true. He was saying how, like, one of the hardest things to cope with, because a lot of times you would hear people argue that, oh, it's just a parent looking for a reason to why their child has this issue or this injury or whatever. And Dell's like, why would any parent jump to that first? That would be the last resort. This is after exhausting all other options, because God forbid you could have, had some control to this outcome. And I think, Josh, you could probably speak on that on probably, was that similar to your personal experience?
Absolutely. There's no plus for saying that your child is vaccine injured. One of the first things I did when my son was in the hospital is, like, I was there, I was destroyed. And I think I was finally able to make a call 6 or 7 days later and actually have a conversation without crying. And I called, like, one of my best friends, and I'm on the phone and I'm telling him what the doctor told me. I really don't know if I would have ever came up with, figured out that it was related to vaccinations, what had happened to my child, had the doctor and the neurologist told me that. But I'm telling my friend, and he got really weird as soon as I said it was a vaccine injury. And that was the start. And of course, now I have this child in a wheelchair who's 2. When he finally got his wheelchair, he was injured at 17 months, but he's very, very small in a wheelchair. And sometimes people on the street would ask, what happened? And I would say it's a vaccine injury. And people would say, vaccine injury, what's that? Like, they didn't even know that a vaccine could harm a human being at all. Hence why we have a sign that says vaccines can cause injury and death. Which is just, it's incredible that you even have to tell people that, but they don't know that. But yeah, there's nothing positive in it for me. Plenty of my friends have gone away over time, family members, but that is like the thing that they think. They think it's almost like this. The father, me, Otto's dad is angry and upset and looking for something, looking for someone to blame. I'm not looking for anyone to blame. But there's a lot of carelessness in the vaccine program, a ton, and really, finding out that, even a lot of these diseases are not half as dangerous as I've been led to believe. Polio is not as dangerous as I've been led to believe. And I think that there's this thing that everybody sort of just makes a weird assumption about the vaccine program, that when you get vaccinated as a child, you're now vaccinated for life. I got the polio vaccine when I was 10, so I'm never going to get polio. And that's one of the stupid things people say to us as they're walking by, if we have signs somewhere, got polio. And what they think is, because you got a vaccine when you were young for polio, that you still haven't gotten polio. The polio vaccine is supposed to last 18 years. all vaccines have waning immunity. So the majority of the adult population in the United States has no working polio vaccine in them. And yet we don't see polio tearing through the country. People say, oh, it's because of herd immunity. No, because it all wore off on most of us. So yeah, it's pretty crazy, you know, the amount of confusion there is out there over this. But yeah, nobody's getting rich. I'm not getting rich by talking about this, and it's really not the most pleasant thing to do and pleasant thing to fight. And yeah, there is just so much anger over everything. But yeah, there's no benefit. There's no plus here. It is the only reason why we're talking about it is because it's really the thing that happened to our children.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing too is like you would have a discussion with somebody and you bring up the vaccine adverse reaction system, and it's like they actually do document injuries. Like this isn't something that just, you know, Jennifer McCarthy's saying. Like people have gotten hurt, they've documented it, and it's completely under, you know, reported. Which what was it, a Harvard study where it was like, you know, very underreported. Most people don't even know that system exists. Most parents, you know, if they have a child that has, you know, acting weird or different sometime after the vaccine, won't even link the two. And if they go to the pediatrician might be so pro-vaccine, because that's the majority of their job, is just selling you vaccines. Then they might just basically, you know, brush it off as it's something else. And so it's like there's a system, and there are cases of people dying and getting harmed, which isn't that hard to understand. And I know I use this example all the time, this metaphor, sort of, you know, apologies to the listeners, but it's no different than saying I'm gonna mandate peanut butter to every kid in the world. It's like, you know, just because there's an example of 100 kids who ate peanut butter and jelly and didn't have any harmful effect, it doesn't mean that peanut butter can't be harmful to some kids. If you mandate one thing to everybody, there's going to be some people who react differently to it. That's just science. That's just understanding that we're all slightly different and we have different DNAs and different reactions to stuff. So this idea that, you know, when people say, oh, well, vaccines don't cause autism, and I'm like, okay, but can it? Is it possible? Is there a possibility that somebody's going to have a reaction to it? Because even the most harmless things in the world can be lethal to some people. So it's, you know, to me, it's so unscientific. But how do you guys feel about the narrative now, or at least it seems like the public is now much more open to the idea that maybe we should question this, what, you know, has been accepted as safe and effective for so long. Do you see that in your own personal lives, that people are now much more open to this discussion?
Absolutely. I mean, you can go down to the grocery store. Well, for example, we have magnets, car magnets that have some of our slogans on them. And Josh has them stuck to his car. So I know he's experienced, but, you know, going down to the grocery store, you know, we've had people, you know, pass by and say, yeah, right on. And, you know, where before it's like, it, you know, if you 5 years ago having something to that effect, you know, you still get scowls and people judging, but I think it would have been much worse back then. If, you know, the way we're doing things now, it's with the signs, with the magnets, with the flyers, with everything. Yeah, we just have such more positive reception than we would have had previously. And I think, you know, part of the mistake that was made by the powers that be is, you know, forcing this out there on everyone. The fact that it was rushed out there, it's kind of like they can't hide it like they've done with the childhood vaccine. So, I mean, I think it's inevitable that people, you know, would wake up with this. And the sad thing, though, too, is as is the same with the childhood vaccines. I think most people have to learn the hard way. And so you have a lot of people just waking up now because they've had reactions themselves, and you can't hide it.
Yeah, before COVID, it seemed like the people that were actually most interested were crunchy people that were into health and saying, yeah, maybe I should be injecting toxins into my body, and parents people that were making the decisions that were actively vaccinating children and deciding what vaccines to get them. After COVID, everyone's thinking about vaccines. Everybody's talking about vaccines. I mean, it's everywhere. I can't walk into my grocery store without hearing on the speaker, get your vaccine, get your vaccine. CDC recommends vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. So, and everything that they're hearing is positive. And so when they, so now when they hear somebody saying, hold on a second, there's another side, yeah, there's more interest now than ever before.
Yeah, and I think you guys are making such a good point about this. It was almost just so obvious when you're mandating, kids and, to get the vaccine, go back to school, to go back to college. These are people that, even with the inflated numbers, we knew were at like very little risk. And it was so obvious that there's something more going on, and that, it's weird. And I don't know, if you guys are spiritual, religious, or whatever. I'm Portuguese. I was raised Catholic, but I kind of fell out of religion for a long time. But it definitely felt like I would have people on over and over again throughout the last couple of years say how it feels like a spiritual battle, like this good versus evil thing. And we did feel like that. And I think that was one of the flaws in some of the people that were listening and fell for the narrative, the mainstream narrative, was the fact that they had a hard time believing that they would put out a product that that they know would harm some and do it purposely. And to me, I think that is like that's the speed bump that some people need to go over, and they struggle to go over because they're like, I just can't take myself there, right?
I remember growing up, and when I was younger, when I was an older teen, thinking everybody's good. Everybody's good. It's just different people have different ideas of what's good and what's not good. And now that I've gotten a bit older, I know that there's just evil in the world. There really truly is evil. I mean, you want to talk about something evil that happened during COVID. There was a bunch of governors and health officials that forced COVID positive patients into nursing homes. Now, it's always been the case that we know with viruses and diseases that the people that are most at risk are the elderly or somebody who has a weak health. And like our governor in California, Gavin Newsom, he put COVID positive patients into nursing homes. And I believe that they knew what was going to happen. And they were even talking about it on the news, like, we got to protect the elderly, we got to protect the weak. And I think there were people that wanted to get those death numbers up. And there was that other health official, I forget her name is the transsexual health person, but that person, in whatever state they're in, they forced COVID positive patients into nursing homes in their state and pulled her mom out. So, that person knew what they were doing. And it's just evil. And unfortunately that exists. And yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing to actually understand that there are human beings out there like this, that there's a lot of human beings out there like this. A lot of doctors don't know, a lot of pediatricians don't know. A lot of them are just, not looking that direction also because that's their bread and butter. But unfortunately, the truth is there's a lot of ugliness and evil out there.
People apparently don't learn from history. We have a large history of governments and authorities perpetrating horrendous crimes against humans, and for people to think that could not happen here, especially when there's plenty of evidence to show that bad things are happening. It's mind-boggling to me to think about how people cannot see this and cannot conceive of evil happening to us now. And to what Josh said, I don't know, I guess humans are weak in a lot of ways. And when you talk about doctors, you think that, oh yes, a doctor is going to have everybody's best interest in mind. But when it comes down to it, if it's their livelihood, people are weak and they'll just go along with whatever they need to do in order to get by, or just ignore something that's staring them right in the face. So, I mean, there's enough there to, you know, make it clear that evil is happening, and, you know, sometimes not intentionally, but it is happening.
Well, and I think some doctors, it's some of them are they're just naive to this other information. They've been sold this idea that the science is settled, and you know, this narrative, and they just go along with it, and they don't know of any other alternative perspectives. And you know, they were just good bookworms that, you know, went to the university, you know, studied what they were told to study and learned what they were told to learn, and that's it. And so I had Jim Abrams on my show some time ago. He was the filmmaker of Naked Gun and Airplane and some of my favorite movies growing up. But I had him on because I'm big into natural remedies and taking care of your own health, and being proactive in regards to that. And he has a really fascinating story with his son Charlie, who was born with these violent seizures, and he would have these, you know, tons of violent seizures daily. And this was at the height of Jim Abrams' filmmaking career, so he had access to all the best doctors, hospitals, could cut in line, all this stuff. And it was just prescription drug after prescription drug, nothing would work. And even what, looking back, he calls a unnecessary surgery to try to resolve the issue, which didn't work either. And then just doing his own research, he found a John Hopkins study from I think it was from the 70s, early 70s, about some success they were having with getting rid of these seizures with the ketogenic diet. And he goes to his doctor and he's like, hey, you know, how come nobody's brought this up? He's like, oh, sounds difficult. You know, and that's what he says to him. And he's like, more difficult than dealing with these violent seizures, you know. And so he ends up putting his kid on the ketogenic diet, curing him naturally of these seizures, and ends up starting a foundation called the Charlie Foundation, named after his son, looking into, you know, basically dietary therapies for all different types of diseases, autism, you know, all different types of things. And it just, you know, but the reason why I bring up that story so often, why I think it's so important, is because his doctors were told, this is the symptom, and then this is what you give them, this is what you suggest, and all other alternatives, even if they're out there and they exist, if they're, you know, they're not something they even entertain. So there are a lot of times where, like you guys were saying, like we have this idea that if the doctor's not suggesting it, then it must be pseudoscience, it must not work, it must not even be an option. And we live in a world today where we have access to information. We can do our own research. They don't have a monopoly on information anymore. Even though this kind of goes into the censorship issue, why it's such a big issue is because, like you said, Josh, even if you have a discussion with somebody and you guys are holding signs, you have a discussion with somebody, you're like, wow, what they said really hit home and makes a lot of sense. Let me go home and do my own research. And then all of a sudden, everything that pops up on Google is that's pseudoscience, or that's been debunked, or whatever. It's like they're going to go back to where they started, where they're like, no, I guess they're just conspiracy theorists. And so that, you know, that's why the censorship issue really makes it that much harder for us to get through to people and get this information to people.
You know, and we thought about that because, of course, right from the beginning, you know, from the very first time we went out with those signs, people were saying, "Oh, that's BS." So I've been a medical doctor for 30 years. None of these signs are true. I have a PhD. Everything here is misinformation. So by the second time we went out, what we did is we made flyers that actually mirrored the sign on one side. So for instance, this says COVID-19 vaccines are made using aborted fetal cells. And so if somebody's holding that sign and somebody comes over, they want more information, or they're calling BS, they would give them a flyer. And so you have the sign on one side. On the other side, you have a little bit more detail about that. But there's a QR code that a person can scan with their phone that takes them to usually a government source to show that that piece of information is true, or the scientific study, or whatever there is, and an acceptable thing. We're not sending them to Natural News or the High Wire or something they're not going to take seriously, but to a source they're going to take seriously. And in, you know, in about 20 seconds, I've been talking to people where they're calling BS, and in 20 seconds they can pull out their phone, pop it up, and they're looking through and they're reading it themselves. And so that's one way we have tried to use to sort of circumvent all the censorship. and shadow banning, and actually get the real information to people. And I think that is where everything lies. That's the big problem. Is it's an information war, and we live in a society of cliff notes, and I don't want to like sit and read studies. I didn't, even when I started researching vaccines, I spent however many hours I did and then threw up my hands and gave up. This is important stuff. The health, the things that go into your body are more important than I think people even imagine. And we are all, as a society, we are used to the cliff notes, as in what we read on the Pfizer sponsored news or what we hear from our doctor. We just trust that. And and I'm sure a lot of people think I'm not smart enough to figure this out. You are. And unfortunately, we cannot rely on Pfizer sponsored news agencies. We can't rely on the doctors, because quite frankly, doctors get a very, very small amount of vaccine training in medical school, which is one of the thing I did throughout the Vax tour. Is when we would talk to medical doctors, I would ask them how much they learned in medical school about vaccines, and it was less than a day. They didn't even learn about the ingredients or the adverse reactions, and that's the standard education for somebody who's going to go into vaccinating. So I really, people need to wake up to the fact that you have to do the research. You have to spend the time. And I know people, you don't want to. I didn't want to. Nobody wants to. Most people don't want to sit there and read that kind of thing. That's not fun. But that is unfortunately what needs to be done now, because you can't trust anybody, and especially people who are profiting from this.
And the thing is, I don't even have anything against anybody who's even after doing their own research still wants to do that. My biggest problem is that you should have all the information and then decide. And I remember when I started doing my podcast, I had people that were in my personal life saying like, oh my God, I listened to that podcast with Dr. Brian Hooker or Del Bigtree or whoever. And I felt so guilty because I vaccinate my kids. And I'm like, I'm like, you were a victim of propaganda. Right. They only, you can only make decisions based on the information you have, and they were controlling the information. And, even before 20, you saw like obviously the censorship really amp up during COVID, but in the vaccine discussion, anything that was anti-big pharma or anti-vaccines, like we're seeing it way before COVID. I mean, I would have conversations on the show about all types of controversial topics, but nothing would, get shadow banned or censored or flagged on any of the social media platforms or video platforms like vaccine discussions. And it was, I think, the first show that I ever had like disappear on iTunes was a Del Bigtree interview. It was just like, wow, this is weird, and so it just, you could see, and the thing is, they're suppressing that information. I've had Mickey Willis on the show. The extent that they went to make sure you couldn't watch his documentary Pandemic, because so many people just had that eureka moment where it's like, oh my God, like this makes way more sense than what the TV's been telling me, because the TV's been telling me like the whole world's gonna die and there's like a huge percentage of the planet's gonna die, and yet like nobody in my personal life is dying, and I don't know of any any place where all this is happening. And so the censorship thing is such issue. Big tech, big pharma, they're all in bed together. And something Olivia said, which is really true too, like when you learn history, like if they will lie to you into a war, which they know will lead to deaths, why do you think those same people care about vaccine deaths? Like they obviously don't care about their decision making leading to unjust deaths. So it's like this idea of like, okay, well, they wouldn't do it because they wouldn't put out a product that they know could harm some. It's like, we've been to wars, which literally is killing of people, and yet like they're okay with saying, oops, maybe we messed up, maybe we shouldn't have went there, and they just raise their hands and everybody got loaded, and the Halliburton and KBR and all these other people get loaded. It's like it was so surreal to me how vaccines was the one topic where people could not see that. It was the same story over and over again. It was about money, it was about power. I think a lot of people are taking the word depopulation much more seriously now, and eugenics and all these other things, which were other very taboo topics. And now people are like, yeah, that kind of like I can kind of see it. I can kind of see and now, I mean, just all the evidence that is just coming out with like all these athletes passing out and nobody can even bring up the word vaccine being an option. You know, it's like football players hit each other all the time. Soccer's been around forever, I'm a sports fan. I'm a huge soccer fan, and all of a sudden in the last couple of years, there's athletes passing out. There was also one thing that people haven't talked a lot about was in the Premier League. There's many games where they had to stop the game or pause the game because there was somebody in the stands that passed out and was having some type of heart, and that wasn't reported because it wasn't a famous player. So I would watch a game. I remember this game very well. It was I'm a Tottenham Hotspurs fan, and a player pointed at the stands was hitting the ref and pointing at the stands, and they paused the game and they didn't show it. They just briefly talked about it, said that some fan is having a cardiac arrest or heart attack or something along those lines in the stands, and I'm just like, why is nobody asking the question, like, is this vaccine related? And do you? It's almost, and I always say, like, you can only suppress the truth for so long. We will be conspiracy theorists and lunatics for a little bit, but eventually, that will turn into us being right. And I also think that there's some concern about people who want to put COVID behind us and move on. And it's like, okay, I have my life back. I can go out to eat again. I can go to, a show again. I can do all these things. Let me just move on. It's like, no, man, should be held responsible. And there's still a lot of people out there that are going to have health issues that they might not even realize are related to the vaccine, and so I'm hoping that people keep and it's hard to keep talking about because for 2-3 years that's all you talked about, and I can see why people want to move on, but it's like I also get upset every time I think about like the kids who had to wear masks, the kids who lost their senior year in high school or lost their senior year playing sports or just to go back to college had to take a vaccine and then all the lying, because that's the other thing that was fascinating was Big Pharma wasn't even selling their product because they couldn't, because it was emergency authorization, so they couldn't market it, but they spend tons of money getting influencers, YouTubers. If you watch any sport, if you watched pro wrestling, basketball, football, whatever, every commercial was just vaccine propaganda, vaccine propaganda, vaccine propaganda. My son told me, we were talking about it yesterday, and he was telling me that there's kids in his class, he's 7, who talked about getting the vaccine. And I'm just like, I get so upset. It's like one of the few topics that like gets me so upset, because it's just like watching trace amounts, because that's one of the older vaccine documentaries that a lot of us ran into at first. Like, it pulls at your heartstrings when you see these parents talk about their personal stories. It's like you can't help but get upset. And when it's a war, it's a little different because it's like adults, but there's nothing worse than like purposely harming kids. And it's frustrating. But do you guys see any light at the end of the tunnel? Do you see it? I know I'm ending the show with such a negative perspective on things, but do you guys see a light at the end of the tunnel? Do you see things, maybe some justice for all this? And of course, we also slightly hit on the idea that maybe the overall perspective on the vaccine topic can be changing for the better also.
Well, I think people are waking up in droves right now, big time. And of course, we don't really know how many people have sort of figured this out, because everybody's so shadow banned and censored. You can't really, you use the word vaccine as a social media post, it triggers the algorithm. You can't even type that word without it being triggered. So I don't think we have any idea really how many people have figured this out, but I know 30% of this country said no under crazy amounts of pressure, and people lost their jobs and couldn't go to school, couldn't go to a concert at a certain point for not taking that vaccine. So 30% of the people in this country sounds like have an idea. It's not the greatest idea. And then there's this huge amount of people who have seen things happen to other people. I think there was a recent poll that came out saying that 1 in 4 Americans believe that they know someone who has died as a result of the COVID-19 vaccine. That's a huge number. And when we prep for a lot of these demonstrations and stuff, especially like, in the last couple of years, we're buying hundreds of sticks at Home Depot, and we're out, and of course we're asked, like, what are you doing? What's all this shit for? And we'll tell them we're doing a protest, and what for? Oh, just we're fighting for health rights. We want people to be able to choose. We're against vaccine mandates, and almost every single time it comes up with a complete stranger, and they hear that, I regret getting it. I've not been the same since I got it. My daughter had a miscarriage right after getting the vaccine. I've had chronic migraines since getting the vaccine. So man, I really think so many people have figured this out, and it makes me sad, obviously, that people did have to learn the hard way. And I don't think people are out of the woods yet. I think people are going to keep dropping dead. With those mRNA studies that were done before COVID, they never even got the human trials because the animals would pretty much all or almost all die in these studies within 2 to 3 years. So we're only a couple of years since they started giving this vaccine out. And so I think we're going to keep seeing people fall and drop dead. And I think an incredible amount of people are figuring this out. And it's probably only a matter of time before everybody grabs their pitchforks and says, you guys need to be held accountable. I want Fauci locked up. I want justice.
I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel as far as people waking up. Whether anybody will be held accountable, that's a different story. Because you just see so many things happening now where people are getting off scot-free. But I think, the thing is we live in a duality. Life is chaos, and nothing's ever going to be perfect. That doesn't mean you stop fighting. But, I think one of the major things of life is that it is a learning experience. And even though we'd love to have it be a utopia and everybody to be informed and everybody to be healthy and good and, treating each other with respect, it's never going to be that way. So, and people, unfortunately, will have to get harmed. Have bad things happen in order to wake up. But I think that's all our kind of spiritual journey here in this reality. But you just keep fighting anyway because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think another light at the end of the tunnel is that this is a much easier discussion to have in public than it was before. If you bring it up, you can really start off talking about the COVID vaccine, and then that can be a segue to just a general topic. Because the COVID vaccine, like we said, it's almost like they overplayed their hand. Like they end up messing up because something that they've done such a great job brainwashing the general public that was safe and effective, they have now planted a seed of doubt, because it became so obvious when you're forcing healthy kids who are at no danger to by this virus to get it, when you're everything, all the lies, all the deception, all the censorship. Any doctor that had a different opinion was being censored and called pseudoscience. People like Dr. Robert Malone, who was involved with the patenting of the technology, is being censored. People like Jimmy Dore, who was obviously pro-vaccine because he got vaccinated, but just to speak out about his injury after getting vaccinated and how he's felt since, he's getting demonized. It became so obvious that this wasn't about facts or science or any of that stuff. It was about control, and it was about money and power, and maybe even darker than that, it was about depopulation. And I've thought about this a lot myself, about this idea of it almost seemed like they were purposely killing the older people. And when you look at older people, most of them aren't contributing to society anymore financially, right? They're not workers, they're not investors, they're kind of they're living off their retirement or whatever, this and that. And there's a lot of security blankets for older people and benefits for them. So it's like you're kind of getting rid of that crowd, that and it's like it kind of makes sense when you think about, possible motivations to do so. And then you look at the World Economic Forum, right? And people that became a household name. And you look at Bill Gates, who had a pretty rosy public perception, on TV. Everybody talked about how great of a guy he was and all this stuff. And now people were finally starting to second guess his true intentions, and which I always thought was silly, because I'm like, this guy in the same conversation, same speech, would talk about how he wants to vaccinate the world and then talk about overpopulation. It's like, can you put the two together? Like, there's something fishy there. And what does he know about health? That's the other thing. Like, a lot of these guys that are on TV telling you to get vaccinated, there's a reason for it. Either they have interest, financial interest, or they're in Bill Gates's history, his parents were linked to the eugenics movement and all that stuff, which was a real movement, and that existed. That wasn't something that you only heard about on Alex Jones. Like, there were people, that was an actual movement. It was science at the time, right? And I think now people are also going to question the polio thing, because that was one of the go-to arguments, was like, oh, well, what about polio? Well, the same way that they're giving the vaccine all the credit for why, we have our lives back, they did the same thing with polio. The polio numbers were going down when they introduced the vaccine. And, unless you lived in that era, that at that time, you don't know how much of what the news is telling you happened was true and how much of it was just propaganda,
and they also reclassified polio at the time. So right after they introduced the polio vaccine, then they said, oh, we're going to call some of these polio cases, the one where the paralysis lasts longer than 30 days, we're going to call those Guillain-Barré. And then these other polio cases, we're going to call these transverse myelitis. And so when they started reclassifying them under other names, oh, look, polio's reduced. No, you just separated these polio cases and called them something else. These are tricks that they've been using for years. But yeah, you got to do the research to find this stuff out.
Absolutely. So what's in the near future for Vias for Vaccine? Any future projects? Anything going on? And also, how can people connect with you guys, link up, keep up with what you're doing and all your work?
Our big focus really over the last couple of years has been, we still, talk about vaccine risk in general, but our huge focus is talking about the adverse reactions that we know are happening because of the COVID-19 vaccine. Because when you have that heart attack, when you have blood clots, myocarditis, Bell's palsy, any of these things, and you go to the hospital, they're not going to tell you it was because of the vaccine. So we keep putting those things out. We keep putting them out. And, our hope is that when these things happen to people, that they figure out why, so then when they come to the hospital and they say, well, is it because I got vaccinated? And they say, no, but, well, that's weird because I didn't have these things, but I saw some anti-vax guy holding a sign that said I would get it from the vaccine, and then I got it right after I got the vaccine. So I just really, I think that's one of the most important things we can do to communicate with people, all over the country. Now, sometimes I think a lot of us, who are friends with people who talk about these things, will look on social media and say it's everywhere. Everybody knows. We're still in our bubble. It's really, a lot of this stuff just circulates, amongst ourselves, people on the outside. They're not watching Highwire. They're not reading Children's Health Defense. They're watching ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN, sponsored by Pfizer. And those agencies are not talking about this stuff. And so it's really important to go out and talk about that. And so that's, a lot of what we do with the signs that we have and the flyers that we have, and people can kind of download our flyers, and we have tutorials on how to build our signs and talk about where to go to help educate if people want to do it. And of course, people can do it just having educational materials on them when they're at a PTA meeting or wherever, in a Costco, or buying diapers in Target, just having those conversations. So we encourage people to do that. And, they can get, more information about how to participate and get these educational tools at viasforvaccine.com. And of course, we help organize rallies and protests all over the country. And so, you know, we have lots of information there, but people can also reach out to us for help, and we try to help everybody we can.
Yeah, I'll put links to that in the show description and anything else that you guys want in the show description. If you have any social media accounts, YouTube channels, anything like that, I'll put there. And thank you so much, guys, for all the work you've invested in this fight and in this whole discussion. Like I said, it's much easier now to talk about it publicly, but you guys were doing it when it was not so easy, and when it really, you know, every discussion about vaccines did lead to some type of emotional conflict, and people had this emotional reaction. So I think that it is a step in the right direction in regards to the way people look at vaccines, and you know, like I said, I've also seen in my personal life with people who would never question vaccine science and now are open to, at least open to the discussion. But we have to keep you know, putting the information out there, because like you said, the average person is watching the mainstream media for their information, which is sponsored by Pfizer, like you said.
Pfizer.
Yep. But thanks again, and I'd love to have you guys back on in the near future. And I also host another show called The Union of the Unwanted, which I don't know if you're familiar with. Dell's been on there. Robert Malone, Peter McCullough, usually regulars on this show. I'll bring them over there. It's kind of like a big panel show where we just kind of brainstorm stuff and bring a bunch of different thinkers and people in the community together to kind of bounce ideas off each other. So definitely have to invite you guys on one of those in the near future too. And enjoy the rest of your week. Send me, well, typically I send you the show once it's up, but if you want to do any work to the video, send me that once you're done with it, and I'll post it, and we'll all keep in touch.
Right on.
Perfect.
Sounds good. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you
You
too.
too.
Take care.